Black Ram 313 back at it again. You know why? It's because this is therapeutic, man. Back again with another video, hence another therapy session. Today's topic and title at hand is my thoughts on the Chicago issue. According to the Chicago Tribune newspaper, as of late summer 2018, quote, so far this year, at least 1,869 people have been shot, and there have been at least 334 homicides, according to data collected by the Tribune. That's lower than the past 2 years, when violence reached levels not seen in 2 decades, but higher than other recent years, close quote, Chicago Tribune newspaper. Now, Chicago, the city that's famous or infamous, known for its crime and violence. Myself, born and raised in Chicago, attending the public schools, all the way through high school, even community college in the city. Living on the west side of Chicago, growing up as a teenager in the 90s, where the homicide rates were 700 to 900 per year, each year from about 1990 to 1998. My hometown, Chicago, Chi-Town, the Windy City, also known as Chirac, which stays in the national news due to its notoriety for crime and violence. Also being the city where Obama got his start in politics. But the legacy of crime and violence here is a deep one. Deep roots. Goes way back to the 1920s, starting with a man who's known throughout the nation, probably throughout the world, a man by the name of Alphonse Capone, in whom you may know him as Al Capone. Gangland style and gang culture. And as far as the more urban communities, so to speak, this culture is deeply rooted there as well, starting in the 1960s and the 70s, first starting out as a benevolent force. Young men would organize and congregate in communities, having food programs to help out the poor and disenfranchised, having food drives, walking children to school, all about safety and securing the neighborhood from outside forces. But that culture, those organizations soon evolved into something monstrous, particularly in the mid-'80s with the advent of a plant, the cocoa plant, if you know what I mean. And this item crept into neighborhoods, creating a powder keg of a situation. I wonder who's responsible for putting it there. And from that point, mid-'80s, the streets made many millionaires, and started a specific culture, a culture of gross materialism. And with the advent of this plant, it began to be all about your clothes, your shoes, your jewelry, and your cars. If you want to impress the ladies, you needed these things. If you were to be socially acceptable, you needed these things. And growing up, it would always amaze me to see someone dressed from head to toe with Jordans on back in the day. And they also had at this time, and still now, but we used to wear 8-ball jackets. If you're old school, you know what I mean. And then 8-ball jackets turned into or evolved into Pelly jackets, Pelly Pale. very expensive but nice looking jackets that cost upwards to $1,000 or $2,000 with no perceivable limit. And you also had to have in your ghetto attire a 150 hat. I don't know if that's just strictly a Chicago thing, but the hat cost 150, and above the bib, it had like a little clock on it, and the hat would cost 150. That's why they call them 150 hats. And of course, you had to have the Jordan gym shoes and expensive blue jeans. Back then, it was Jabot, and now, of course, True Religion and other expensive brands. But you had to have these things. And again, what always amazed me that somebody have all of these, I'm talking about head to toe, jewelry, the clothes, the shoes, and of course now you have to have the expensive belt with it. It costs $200 or $300 as well, and the earrings, of course, and the jewelry. But I would see people dressed head to toe, guys dressed head to toe, and females too. But if you went to their homes, they were living in a mess. Squalor conditions, literally. Roof damn near caving in. Barely a mattress to sleep on. Television on crates, literally. But she and he dressed really well, though. All about pretense. It became all about acting or showing that you have money through your clothes, which you really didn't. You were poor, but pretending to have riches. Such a pretentious subculture. But it became everything. And women and men alike would judge each other based off of these very expensive and useless items. No savings now. House not even clean. But you look good, though. Shitty sharp, as we used to call it back in the day, right? And this culture became ever increasing popular in the 80s. And I wonder who's mainly responsible for such a norm of materialism in these communities, huh? Single motherhood, anyone? Single motherhood who or in whom produced these monsters, these thugs, the succubi who has no morals and no ability to choose a good father for her offspring. Anyway, so in the 1990s, in the mid 90s even, thug culture became mainstream with movies like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. And it was around that time when the succubi became even more rigid than ever before about her standards in the dating market, declaring that his status must be hood, declaring that she has to have a roughneck. In other words, he got to be a thug and a baller, girl. But he got to be hood, says Beyonce. If your status ain't hood, don't be looking for her. And this became the mantra, the battle cry of every girl in the hood. He got to have money and he has to be hood. Gotta be a roughneck. And the 90s, come to think of it, were worse as far as violence is concerned than it is today. Much more. The only difference between the 90s and now, at least in Chicago, is that the persons involved in such criminal activity, when it comes to violence, they got their intended target, unlike today where everyone's a target. But this dysfunction in gang culture that really, really kicked off in the 90s set the tone for what we see now. See, in the 90s, the succubis, right, who had to have the roughneck, mated with such and produced these little monsters that we have now. These are the succubis, kids, who were teenagers in the mid and late 90s. They created Thuggo. Yes, this is the origin of this current culture. And now, instead of gang culture, it's evolved into block culture. It's about this block, not the larger organization, but this block versus the other block, or this crew versus that crew. Many guys out there are renegades. There's no structure, no accountability. And many people say this is possibly due to the mass incarceration of the leaders of these street organizations in the 90s. You cut the head and the body will follow. So now it's almost every man for himself, smaller groups instead of larger organizations. But it's become very wild. Again, the difference is the innocence that's been taken, the children that are being hurt and harmed, the elderly that are being hurt and harmed. Again, in the 90s, you had much more of a preponderance or propensity or number of homicides, but they got the intended victim. But now everybody can be a victim, no matter how decent you are. If you were in those communities, you can become a victim. I had a conversation with a thuggo, and I asked this young thuggo who's deep involved in the culture of criminality, deep in the game, so to speak. I asked him, I said, hey man, why are there so many innocent people getting hurt? I understand if you're beefing with another block or another group of guys, but why are the kids and the old folk out here getting hurt? And his answer was astonishing. This guy told me that if his block or his crew is at war with another, that the block that the opposition lives on, also referred to as the ops, that the block that they live on, they want everyone who is a resident there in that neighborhood, on that block, they want everyone to know that there is a war. Spray the whole block. Put everybody on notice, kids, old folks. He said everybody need to know that it ain't safe out here and that our guys are about business. Amazing. No regard, no respect for the lives of children, the elderly, and innocent men and women who have nothing to do with the block. And now there's a cry for politicians to do something about these situations. But the politicians can't do anything. And let me tell you why the politicians can't solve the problem. Let me tell you why the police can't solve the problem. Let me tell you why community leaders that are living in Chicago, who have been here for quite some time, leaders like Minister Louis Farrakhan, leaders like Reverend Jesse Jackson, pastor this and pastor that, reverend this and reverend that, they cannot solve the problem. No matter how many protests and marches you have, they cannot solve the problem. You want to know why? The answer is very, very simple. See, Thuggo resides in the house with his mother and sometimes his grandmother. Depending on how old he is, sometimes his girlfriend either lives there too or he's at her mama's house. But again, Thuggo resides in the house with his mother and grandmother, and or who mama and or grandmother are the real community leaders. They live there with them. Therefore, your activism against the violence is unsuccessful because you are essentially protesting mama and grandmama, in whom houses the individuals who are the problem, who are keeping up the chaos on the block, in the neighborhood, in the community. And mama and grandmama tithe to the same pastor who's leading the protest. So a protest is such a protest against the boys that mama and grandmama provide for. Her son, her grandson. And by the way, she only feels bad when it's her son or grandson that gets hurt or meets his demise, not somebody else, grandson or son. And also, and although her son is out there doing the fool, tearing the block up, she believes that her innocent son, who she raised, can do no wrong. So no change, because you're not going to protest and speak against the ones who support the day-to-day lives and activities of the community threat. You're not going to say anything to she in whom supports the community threat, who takes care of the community threat. Yes, she right there with the pastor protesting, but it's her son who she raised, whose father that she picked, whose father who may be incarcerated, who she knew wasn't no good, but his status had to be hood, is what was said. Got to have a roughneck, is what was said in the 90s and early 2000s. So because of her mating choices, which produced these monsters, children by men who were monsters, who were also raised by their single mothers. But you can't mention these things. No. You can't talk about that. You can't criticize, let alone sanction a succubi who gave birth and raised these monsters. Where did he get it from? Thuggo? He got his attitude from his mother. His impulsiveness from his mother. His lack of self-control and discipline from his mother. Except with testosterone and aggressiveness like a man. Thuggo who can't put a sentence together, hence mumble rap. But that's who you're protesting against. Thuggo comes in the house every night. You're not going to protest that, are you? So you cry out for the politicians to do something. You cry out for the police to solve the problem. But do you realize that the police can't stop crime? No, it is impossible for police departments to stop crime. Why, you may ask? Why, Black Ram? Because the police come after the fact to investigate and seek to arrest. It is humanly impossible to prevent crime from a law enforcement aspect. Simple physics here. They don't have a machine that can predict when Lil 30 Shot is going to act a fool on the block. The idea behind police departments as an organization is as a possible deterrent because of presence and consequence, but it is not preventative. Police departments are reactive, not proactive. And unless you want them to show up at your doorstep or at someone else's doorstep in high crime areas to come and be inside your home with you, there's nothing the police can do. There's a saying, an adage, that when seconds matter, the police are minutes away. Again, reactive. So your community leaders are not going to go against the mama and the grandmama who supports them, because to go after the mama and the grandmama is to go after the support system of Lil Thuggo. So you want to act in these communities as if there's a mystery of why the things are going on, why the crime is so high, why these things are happening. You want to act as if it's a mystery when the problem is right there in your house. And in these communities, You have the poor and the middle class living side by side for the most part. And this is one of the reasons why the middle class, the middle class and the working class are often the victims, whether it's intended or unattended, because they live right next to each other. In fact, here in Chicago and probably in your city, the only difference between the school teacher and the poor person who is receiving free government housing, the only difference between the free government housing person and your middle class, working class person, such as a school teacher, is this. The school teacher may own the house that's right next to the apartment building or home that Keisha, who's receiving government assistance, lives in. So Keisha receives assistance, in other words, free rent, living right next to somebody who's paying a mortgage. That's the only difference between the teacher and Quita in the hood. They live right next to each other. So a school teacher comes home, Quita's son is tearing the block up, and poor Miss Johnson, 58 years old, about to retire, is hurt in an incident involving the thugs in the community because she wrong place, wrong time. But nobody wants to address who's living in Quita's house. Nobody wants to address who's living in the 50-year-old grandmother's house. Their support system. You can't talk about that. You can't criticize the succubi, right? And again, this is why a middle class person is often the victim of such crimes in the community, because they live right next to the problem. The wise in this liberal city realize that this city is only suitable for the very rich. And this realization has led to a mass exodus out of Chicago into the surrounding suburbs, and even more of a massive exodus out of the state of Illinois itself. The wise move away. In fact, this exodus has caused the state of Illinois to go from being the 5th largest state in the union by population size to the 6th largest state in the union by population size. Since about 2014 to 2017, Illinois has lost more residents than any other state in the United States. And of course, these people take their you losing a tax base, and you losing other revenue, and you losing residents. Therefore, it affects your economy. Rising prices. An exodus from the state. And I wish that I was one of them who was wise enough to leave the state. But I do live outside the area, but I have other obligations that make me stay here, right? Got to do what you got to do. But the wise move away from the problem. They get away from Lil 300 Shot. They get away from his mama and his grandmama. Mama who, again, had to have his status hood. That was her crying in the 90s when she got pregnant. Her guy in and out of the system, incarcerated 1 year to the next, until the point where either he meets his demise or does 30, 40, 50 years. She becomes a single mother, producing Thuggo and Young Thought. And Young Thought goes and mate with another Thuggo. And what kind of children do you expect from Young Thought and Lil Thuggo? What do you expect their children and the mind state of those children to be? But you can't address that, can you? Chicago, the place of very high crime, wealth inequalities, very cold, overall awful weather, decaying infrastructure, along with some of the highest sales, property, and state income tax in the nation, this place is more than undesirable to live in. In these urban areas called the hood, it is unsafe to walk those areas at any time, no matter who you are. I try to avoid those areas, although I'm in some of those areas as I work in the city, but I do not live in the city. I got really tired of going to bed at night, being awakened by hearing arguments, fights, sounds of broken glass, tires screeching, gunshots, and the never-ending sounds of police and ambulance sirens. You can have that. Let me get away from that into the suburbs. However, still work in the city. Still got to be here to fulfill my duties and obligations. But it's a terrible place to be. Terrible place to live. What's the solution, Black Ram? As some would say, the solution can only come from, I say the solution can only come from those living directly in those areas. My suggestion, instead of asking Black Ram or anybody else what the solution is, you should go to the leaders of those communities and ask them for solutions. See what they got to say about fixing it. The community leaders. No, I'm not talking about Reverend so-and-so and Minister so-and-so. I'm not talking about this community activist and this community organizer. I'm talking about the real leaders of the community. Go to them and ask them for the solution. The offspring of those who said in the 60s, I don't need no man. Go to those who said you gotta have a roughneck in the 90s and in the early 2000s, says that his status has to be hood. Go to them for the solution, not me. See what they got to say about it. See what their plan of actions is, right? She is your queen, right? She is a god, right? Why don't you see what her solution is? You mean to tell me your God can't fix your problem? Your queen can't fix your problem? The real community leaders can't fix your problem? You know, the woman who can do it all by herself? The single succubi, the single mother succubi, she can't solve the problem? She's supposed to be all powerful, right? That's where the solution should come from. For the thinking man, our solution is to get the hell out of Dodge and let them deal with that. That's what I say. They're the underlying cause and problem, so they should be also the solution. Now, I know a lot of people ain't going to agree with that, but prove to me that my logic is flawed. Prove to me that the main contributors to such dysfunction isn't the one who supports those who are causing the issues. If the United States had knowledge of an organization that was bringing chaos to the United States' interest, the first thing they'll do is cut off that organization's supply and support network, freezing bank accounts, forcing them out into the open, things of that nature, right? Certain words like you can't use on the tube, so I'm going to refrain from saying exactly what I really want to say. But you go after the support base, but you're not going to do that in Chicago or in Philly or in Los Angeles or in parts of Florida or in parts of Louisiana. You're not going to Memphis and doing that, are you? You're not going to point out the main problem, the main issue. You're going to continue to think, or at least pretend, as if all of these things are a mystery and there's no way to stop it. Because you're not going to protest Keita and Quisha. You're not going to protest the grandmama and the mamas. You're not going to hold them accountable. You're not going to hold your leaders responsible, are you? Not at all. So that's the Chicago issue. It's the issue, it's the problem, and your solution lies with your queen. So keep marching, I guess. There isn't much else you can really do. Again, because you can't criticize the queen goddesses and her choices that led to the monstrous creations Thuggo and Young Thought. Black Ram 313, and I'm out.